Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I was talking to Mark, who used to run the Unrivaled Boxing channel. He's not on YouTube anymore. He's a knowledgeable guy, knows a fair bit about the history of the game. He's very good, very knowledgeable. And we were, talking about boxing history. And the inevitable question got asked, who do you think is the greatest fighter ever? And Mark asked me this, and I said, I kind of ummed and ahed, and I said, well, it depends what the criteria is. And I wasn't really avoiding the question. I just didn't really, it's difficult. So he said to me, look, just pick someone, use your own criteria. And I couldn't get past Sugar Ray Robinson. So I said, okay, I'll go with Robinson. And he went with Sam Langford, which perfectly legitimate choice. Very, very easy to make a case for Sam Langford being the greatest fighter ever, as Mark pointed out. Fought from 135 lightweight up to heavyweight. Held the so-called coloured heavyweight title, which you can argue was as legitimate as the other one, the supposed legitimate one. And Langford beat loads of Hall of Fame fighters. He's only about 5'7", I think. Great fighter. But there's one thing that occurred to me during this discussion, and that is the subject of weight. Because when we were talking, I said, look, I don't care about people jumping up weight divisions. It's relatively low on my list of priorities when making a judgment about a fighter historically. And in actual fact, what I was talking about was the modern day equivalent of, because if you talk about someone like Langford, you're talking about, again, someone who fought from lightweight to heavyweight, or let's say Georges Carpentier, the old Orchid man, he fought from, I think, flyweight or modern day light flyweight. Turned pro about 14, I think, but it's probably a strawweight, actually, come to think of it. But he fought all the way up to heavyweight and gave Jack Dempsey a pretty decent fight. So there are exceptions. But if you compare those to the modern day weight jumpers, I think just as world titles have become devalued by there being too many belts, too many ruling bodies, too many weight divisions. So as great as Naoya Inoue is, and he is great, being undisputed in 2 weight divisions, 4 weight classes he's held belts in, the difference in weight is from, what did he start off at? 108, moves up to 122. I mean, it's still a fair chunk of weight, don't get me wrong. But it's not like, say, a Pacquiao who goes from light fly up to light middle, so he goes from 108 to 154. I mean, that's a hell of a jump. And okay, I understand there is a strong argument to be made that Pacquiao may well have been juicing. That's a subject for a different video. He wasn't caught, so you need proof. That's always been the way I go by these things. That's my criteria. So, okay, yeah, and actually, when I was talking to Mark, he made that point about Pacquiao, and it's a valid one. But it seems to me that just as weight divisions have been devalued, so is the idea of jumping up in weight. Because if you're a Langford and you're 5'7" lightweight, and then you end your career fighting heavyweights and beating them, and beating legitimate heavyweights, very, very good heavyweights, and holding the black heavyweight, the coloured heavyweight title for, making 31 defences or whatever it was of it, that's slightly different between jumping up 4 pounds or 6 pounds, or So the obvious question is, when you're making these judgments about who are the best fighters, what's the greatest world champion, what's the I mean, someone like Adrian Broner, for example, is a 4-weight world champion because he's held 4 belts. The reality is he was never really a world champion. He's a title holder. He's held titles in 4 weight divisions. And I mean, Paulie Malignaggi was a pretty good fighter, I think, but I just, does anyone seriously think Broner is an all-time great? Does anyone think Broner belongs in the Hall of Fame just because he's held 4 belts? Whereas someone like Langford, who never held again the supposedly legitimate title, at heavyweight, he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Of course he's in the Hall of Fame. Of course he should be in the Hall of Fame. And of course Broner shouldn't. So the whole idea of jumping up weight, as with holding world titles, has become devalued as boxing has progressed. Especially with, different weight divisions being added over the years as well. Like Nino Benvenuti was a great 154-pound champion. But people remember him for the two middleweight. I mean, he did win the middleweight title as well, but people remember him for the two defeats to Monzon. They forget how good he was at 154. Was it? I'm trying to think of which fighter it was. Emil Griffith, I think, did he hold a 154-pound title? I think he did. I'm doing this off memory, so may not be getting it entirely right, but I think it was Griffith. Nowadays, of course, people would say, oh yeah, Emil Griffith, three-weight world champ, he held the 154 belt. But people only remember Griffith as a welterweight and a middleweight. So, and also some of the early champions in, say, for example, the cruiserweight division. Or say the super middleweight division. They're pretty much forgotten by history. They were decent fighters, but because no one at the time when those divisions were introduced, because they were not really highly thought of and no one really cared, people were, journalists and fans alike, were dismissive of them. So this is why, when people talk about the Bridgerweight division, no one's got any time for the Bridgerweight division. They think it's ridiculous. And to me, having a sort of super cruiserweight division, you can make an argument for it because of how big heavyweights have got. You can make an argument for it. I just think the weights are wrong with Bridgerweight. I think they've got it wrong. It goes up too high. It should stop off at, say, 215, But of course, there'll be exceptions. Deontay Wilder was a Bridgerweight for most of his career. You've got Usyk, who's just smashed the hell out of Tyson Fury. What did he weigh? 222? Not much over Bridgerweight. Well, no, he's in. Is that a Bridgerweight? What's the cutoff at Bridgerweight? 222, 220? So, But I just think that when making these arguments about who you think is the greatest fighter ever, whether you're talking about a weight division or whether you're talking about literally the greatest fighter ever, I mean, virtually an impossible question. You have to consider the time in which, or the era in which the fighter you're choosing fought. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do. There are other factors involved as well, such as a lack of footage. So I made a video, for example, about Harry Greb, saying I thought he was the greatest middleweight ever, as much as I love Marvin Hagler. But the only footage that exists of him is some very brief footage of him not even sparring, just moving around, moving his hands. There's no fight footage. People say that Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest welterweight ever. I think you can make a very legitimate argument looking at the statistics and the opponents and the resume. Absolutely. But there's no footage of him at welterweight. And people say, yeah, but he also won the world title, the middleweight world title 5 times. That's true. And that's a magnificent achievement. Just to play devil's advocate, to win it 5 times, you got to lose it 4. You see what I mean? There's all these permutations to be made, and it's very, very difficult when making these decisions. And that's why the arguments are always going to be largely subjective. If you've got two people who are having a sensible debate, sensible argument, an adult, informed argument, they're both probably going to come up with two different guys and two sort of disparate arguments, but nevertheless ones that hold water if you analyse them. So I just thought I'd talk about that. I want you to tell me now, when you're making that judgment about a fighter, best, even like now, there was someone the other day, I despair. I mean, someone posted something on one of the Facebook boxing pages. Floyd Mayweather is the greatest ever fighter because, and then he listed this sort of laundry list of reasons. And I would have no problem with someone saying Mayweather was the best of his era, but I think you got to go some to say he's the greatest ever. You can say he was great at certain aspects of the sport, you know. So defensively, you could say he was very, very good, for example. But the greatest fighter ever? Really? Okay. I made a video yesterday about Elmer Ray and Obi Walker, you know, how they fought 14 times against each other, 5 times in 3 months. You know, could Mayweather have lived in that type of era where you had to fight literally every other week, certainly, to make a living, where you had to fight the best, at their peak. And you had to, you know, very often, if you were going to be a Hall of Famer, you had to have 250, 300 fights in a whole career. And also, I think the zero is very, very overrated. Certainly nowadays, I get sick of hearing about this. Is the idea that this cult of the zero. I mean, Rocky Marciano was a great fighter, but the fact that he's unbeaten has nothing to do with it. So what? You know, you got to factor in quality of opposition. When he fought with the greats that he did fight, how old were they? How much wear and tear was on them? You got to factor in all that stuff. And just because Mayweather's walking around saying he's 50-0, you know, that's as great as he was, and he was a great fighter. The 50-0 thing is just, it's a relatively, it's not unimportant, but it's relatively low on my list of priorities. For me, again, we're talking subjectivity here, but for me, it doesn't, I'm not that interested in unbeaten records. Unless you really have fought absolutely everyone. I mean, take, for example, Alexander Usyk fought everyone at cruiserweight, cleaned out his division, moved up and has fought, you know, beaten AJ twice and Fury once. That now he's undefeated. He's only had 22 fights, hasn't he? But he's undefeated. But if you analyse the resume, it's very, very good indeed. But anyway, let me know what you think. Leave your comments below, and thank you for watching this. And please subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you can do that, that'd be a big help for us. And if you like the video, please hit the like button. I do always appreciate your time, and yeah, I'll catch you later. Enjoy your weekend. Bye for now.